Hello and welcome to ANC Decides, the show that gives you up-to-the-minute reports, commentary and analysis building up to the ANC's elective conference. I'm your host, Mfundo Mabalai. Here's what's making headlines today. Grahamstown High Court upholds the Eastern Cape PUC's election. This has a major boost for Cyril Ramaphosa, who was nominated as the province's preferred candidate. Presidential candidate Matthew Pasha abandons court bid to set unity nominations aside. Pasha resolves to address nomination issues within ANC structures. And Thabo Manyoni's faction approaches court to prevent Free State delegates from attending the national conference. The bid follows re-election of Ace Magashula as chairperson. Matthew Pasha's court challenge against ANC processes has exposed a new trend of leaders putting the party in the dock. This is against the backdrop of a call for issues to be resolved internally. Pasha's supporters claim to have a backing of Cyril Ramaphosa's camp in the bid to nullify the outcomes of the Mpumalanga Provincial General Council. Pasha sought to have the Mpumalanga unity nomination set aside. The province's stance left Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma edging slightly over Ramaphosa. Pasha argued rather that the nominations were against ANC rules, which dictated that members must specify the name and surname of the nominated candidate. Meanwhile, the series of court cases against ANC processes raises several questions about which faction stands to benefit from the process in the hotly contested race.
We are happy that the judge indicated in the courtroom that they expect members of the ANC to deal with their intra-problems internal. So we are happy. We hope that it's a lesson that our members will always use internal processes of the ANC to deal with problems rather than running to our courts.
The issues around the courts is within people's rights to be able to go through the courts. But as we have said here earlier on, is that they are internal processes. And the ANC encourages its members to actually exhaust the internal processes that are there, so that ultimately, by the time they go to court, the ANC has been afforded an opportunity. But it's within a democratic and a constitutional democracy that people at one point, they will do these particular issues.
We have noted what we call a lawfare, where courts are beginning to direct us on some of the issues that we ourselves, we've got executive powers in terms of executive function. To what an extent are we, in terms of our political leadership, are we allowing a space for the courts to give us direction is a matter that we must continue to engage, so that we do not allow, where we are able to take decisions that we constitutionally we must take. We don't allow courts to interfere in our space, because at the end we'll accuse courts of court overreach or judicial overreach. But there are times where we think that there are instances, one or two, we think generally that there is a judicial overreach. On those instances, we do speak out clearly about them.
Now, today in studio, we're joined by political analyst Papineau Pasha, and via Skype, we're joined by Professor Andre Duvenage. Welcome to the both of you. Now, perhaps to start with you, Professor. Now, this phenomenon of political matters playing out in court, it's never ending. But still, I fail to get the answer as to what came first, the dissent or the ineffective means to deal with grievances.
Well, I would like to start from another viewpoint, and that is that in South Africa, we are a constitutional state. And no one, not even the ANC, no freedom movement is above the law. Therefore, if there's forms of corrupt practices, then it can be dealt with in a legal and a constitutional way. And that is very important. And if we look at the moment at the ANC, there's a lot of problems internally within the structures of the ANC. And clearly, I'm not surprised that we have a huge number of court cases at the moment. About the question, who is going to benefit and who is going to lose from this process? At the moment, it is quite a 50-50 type of scenario. I think that is the group that is going to do the utmost of the opportunities at the moment who is going to win. But I think if the court case against Ace Magashula in the Free State is successful, and if the case against Mpumalanga is also successful, then my take on the situation is it will benefit the Ramaphosa camp and definitely not the NDZ camp.
But we've already seen, at least with the Mpumalanga case today, that the POSA team resolved to resolve these matters internally now, because in most cases, courts are a bit apprehensive. They don't want to allow people to air their matters in court unless they've exhausted all avenues internally.
Well, if you take that point of view, then you must ask the question, why are people getting out of the system all the time? Because the pattern is very prominent. That my understanding, for example, is that in the Free State, they tried that option several times to deal with the matter internally. And at the end of the day, you have no other choice than to use constitutional mechanisms. We must take into consideration these are not small problems within the structures of the ANC. These are about corruption. We are talking about nepotism. We are talking about ghost branches. We are talking about intimidation. These are serious matters. And to my understanding, it is clear that the ANC find it difficult to manage its own affairs.
Papineau, your take? Is the ANC finding it difficult to manage its affairs, and that's why we're seeing all of these cases play out in court? Because the SG, Papineau Pasha, goes on to say such behavior is regrettable. But many are saying, beyond regret, what are you doing to arrest this problem?
Yeah. Look, before I attempt to answer your question, I think the professor is missing, several things. For example, it's true that South Africa is a constitutional democracy, but the ANC itself, it's an autonomous structure with its own constitution. For example, if you look at the decisions that were taken in the last conference in Mangaung, it was resolved that no ANC member would take the ANC to court. But we see it happening. I think what should happen now, going forward, conference itself must decide to strengthen its own internal affairs. For example, at the moment, the level of grievance or how these issues are managed, it's mainly at one level, and that level is mainly where you've got senior leaders coming through to mediate. So what I think should happen going forward is that you must have a mediation process. If that fails, then you go to an appeals process. If that fails, you go to arbitration within the ANC so that members don't take the ANC to court. Indeed, there might be, serious and genuine issues where processes were not dealt with internally, as we have seen with other issues that have been raised. There are instances where matters have been taken to the office of the Secretary General and they were not actually dealt with. But, we should know that, for example, in the ANC, there are different structures where one would then start exhausting these processes. So it is true that, the ANC at the moment, it's not really able to deal with its own challenges. But that being said, there are processes where members can actually exhaust their grievances. But now,
but some could argue, Papineau, that yes, the ANC is an autonomous body, but it's an autonomous body that exists within our South African constitution. So if there's a deviation at some point, we cannot say let's keep things internally, because this is a professional structure where if maybe you were deprived of your rights or somehow you couldn't challenge a certain position within the ANC, do you not have that right to then go and see this matter through in court?
No, I agree at some level. Hence, I'm saying to you, there should be mechanisms within the ANC where they deal with some of these issues. Let me make an example. Professor Duvenar speaks about the provincial conference which just took place in the Free State. Now, remember, a couple of weeks ago, if it was not last week, Thabo Manyoni faction, they took the PEC to court, stating that there were affected branches, 27 branches. And the court decided that these branches must go back to their BGM. And there were 7 days which was given for the BGMs to sit. And that has happened. Now, the provincial elective conference had nothing to do with the delegates or with the nominations of the delegate. It was mainly nomination of the executive, of the provincial executive committee, which has nothing to do with, the first process which took place. Now, I think what should happen, Thabo Manyoni, for example, should decide what he actually wants to do. Over and above that, what we know is that he did not even attend the provincial conference. So, he took a decision not to attend and to be absent. So now I think we must be able to differentiate some of these processes, because there are people, and that's what we have seen, who will take advantage of, you know, some of the administrative glitches. Some people will take opportunistic decision to take the ANC to court. Even in the Eastern Cape, for example, I don't know why, you know, the other faction might have taken the PEC to court, because what I know is that a week ago, regions were sitting with the NEC to exhaust some of this, the concerns that they had. I also know that, and it was in the public space, that there was a team which was delegated to actually go to Eastern Cape to deal with some of the grievances. Now, the question, and maybe that's what you asked, the PEC, the NEC members themselves, have they actually given out a report to the NEC before these members could actually go to court? So I think with...
Professor, do you think that there is also some sort of room there for some ANC members to abuse this privilege or this right that we all enjoy of being able to have our matters heard in court? Do you think some of them could possibly abuse that right?
Yes, I have no doubt that it is possible that you will find groupings that will abuse that right. And without any doubt, this is becoming part of the ANC politics. When you are not winning in a legal way, then you are fighting on another political way. And that is very unfortunate, and this is becoming part of the culture of the organization. So yes, there is room for manipulation, but that is not unique to the ANC. That is also part of basically all organizations, even within the context of office politics. But I would like to disagree with the other political analyst. You cannot argue that an organization is autonomous. This is to argue that an organization is above the law, and that is not the case. Unfortunately, with the Free State scenario, we refer to the problems with the 29 branches. Yes, there were action taken, but unfortunately, the action was not what it was supposed to be. And secondly, there was a number of other problems coming from other branches as well. And at the moment, the legitimacy of that provincial conference is at stake. And I must tell you, if the court is deciding not to allow the Free State to participate in the national conference, it is going to have devastating effects, specifically for the Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma camp. And I would go thus far as to say, if the Free State is not going to participate, it will definitely be to the advantage.
Unfortunately, we seem to have lost Professor there, but I think I know what you wanted to say, that it would be to the advantage of the presidential candidate, Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, on to the Eastern Cape and more lawsuits. Now, Cyril Ramaphosa's campaign has received a boost from the Grahamstown High Court ruling. The court upheld that the election of the PEC, which supports Ramaphosa. Disgruntled ANC members approached the court to set aside the elective conference, which saw Oscar Mabuyane unseat Phumulo Masualle as the provincial chairperson. The province, under Mabuyane's leadership, nominated Ramaphosa as at its recent PGC. The previous PEC, led by Masualle, was back in Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. The internal dispute led to the ANC deploying a team to find a solution to the problems in the province. Meanwhile, the verdict and the impending court challenge by rivals raised questions about the ANC's next move.
No, we're happy about the ruling. Of course, we expected it. We're happy for the people of Eastern Cape. We have been getting messages of support from all sectors of the society, traditional leaders, churches, business people, because they wanted a stability in Eastern Cape. And unfortunately, the confirmation by the court confirms our long view that these are only shenanigans to derail the ANC from executing its historical mandate of transforming the society, of holding the people that are deployed to the state and other institutions accountable about their activities on a daily basis. So I happy about the outcome of the court, not only for ourselves, for the entire population of this country.
Now here's how the ruling boosts Ramaphosa's campaign. The Eastern Cape PEC under Chair Oscar Mabuyane endorsed Ramaphosa for the president of the ANC. The Eastern Cape will be sending the third biggest delegation to the ANC's National Elective Conference. Now, Papineau, this is what actually we're talking about in the Eastern Cape, because this one here, we had the disgruntled ANC members holding the view that even though they curated, some were hospitalized. We all saw that conference that was then dubbed the Festival of Chairs by the presidential candidate Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, with some hospitalized, they felt that morally it was incorrect to continue as ANC comrades with that conference. But the court, so at least some felt we need to confine ourselves to the ANC's constitution, that if these are legitimate delegates, we go ahead. If they curate, we go ahead, which is why they went ahead. What has been your view of that particular conference?
Look, I think let's start with the courts themselves. Surely, if you look at some of the judgments that have been made, they're not consistent. If you look at the Free State, in terms of the 27 branches, the court decided that the branches must go and sit. If you look at the Eastern Cape, where people were injured, as you correctly say, the court seemed to side with the current PEC, and so nothing wrong with some of the administrative glitches. Hence, one is consistently saying that these processes must be able to be dealt with within the NEC, where they look, they extensively exhaust some of the challenges.
Now, you mentioned the NEC. Lindiwe Zulu was there, the minister, yes, and she was very vocal at the time. Many went on to praise her because she said it seemed that a certain grouping was intent on disrupting that conference. That's why they felt it needs to go ahead no matter what. So what happens if you have NEC observers that go on to say, it seems there was some intention, premeditated, to disrupt the conference?
But if you look at the decision that was taken to send a delegation to the Eastern Cape, it was mainly, meant to deal with some of the challenges. You've got 3 regions which have disputed the outcomes. I think for me, what is of concern is that there's an NEC process which is underway. And then, you've got a few people who decide to take the ANC to court. Perhaps they are also aggrieved, but could it be that they allow this process to take place, and then they take, further steps after the process has taken place? But I think they took the decision precisely because the courts have, there's a precedence by the court, to take decisions which can be anti or against. So perhaps that's why they took the decision. But I think it's quite unfortunate because, remember, you've got internal processes, constitutional processes within the ANC. But then obviously you've got the constitution. And when, in terms of litigation, when, respondents and the complainants, they go to court, they would stick to the ANC constitution. But the question is, what mechanism is used by the judge, to deal with some of these cases? But it's quite unfortunate. People were hospitalized, correctly or incorrectly. Let me just make another example in the Eastern Cape. There was an instance where it was said that the ID number of one of the person who was in the data, it was not correct. There was one delegate who was not in the data, and not only one, several delegates. Now the question is, were there administrative glitches? So perhaps the other side could not convince the courts, because the courts, remember, it's not as if they are gods. They base their, their judgment on what they see, which is at hand. Are they using...
so a burden of proof
is
the one that lies with the complainants. But Professor, your take then, would you say that the overused phrase of the centre is not holding here, where we're seeing the leadership somehow also stand in awe or in shock and call this a phenomena of people going to court, but again, some could say it's their systems, ineffective systems and communication that's lacking that has led to many people going to court?
Yes, you are quite right. I have no doubt that there are serious problems within the structures of the ANC in terms of their communication, in terms of their leadership. Probably the biggest challenge at the moment is the lack of leadership and an inability to bring the different factions together. And as a result of that, people are working within the structures, trying to manipulate, trying to deal with their own political objectives, sometimes manipulating the rules. And clearly, this is a very negative situation, specifically when you come to a scenario where it's a close 50-50 type of race between the NDC camp, NDZ camp, and the CR17 group. In that sense, you need strong structures, you need strong processes, you need a certain level of ethics. And unfortunately, this isn't there at the moment. And the ANC as an organization is paying the price. And I must tell you, I will be very surprised National Conference as a united grouping and a united freedom movement. In that sense, I believe they need to deal with the problems and they need to look for answers. The sooner, the better.
Now on to more issues in the court. Now the Free State ANC has elected its new leadership, and now the losing faction is challenging the delegates standing in going to the national conference. A group of Cyril Ramaphosa supporters has launched a bid to stop the Free State's 409 delegates from attending the national elective conference. This follows the re-election of Ace Magashule as the provincial chairperson. Magashule's rival Thabo Manyoni and his supporters abstained from the provincial elective conference, questioning its legal standing. Manyoni backs Ramaphosa, while Magashule backs Dlamini Zuma in the succession race. The latest court battle follows several leaders saying the ANC frowns upon structures taking the party to court. The big question now is why the ANC doesn't take action against members who drag internal processes to court. Now here's the basis for the Manyoni camp's court challenge, and I quote, 98 branches, general meetings did not follow proper ANC procedure and protocol. If 1/3 of BGMs were not run properly, then the rest were probably also irregular. Selection of delegates for the ANC National Conference was not in line with the Constitution, unquote.
Aware of any court case against us. It is media yesterday, and I think even now, my suspicion is that we're insinuating there's one. Up until our lawyers are saying there's something on the table, we can't canvass for anything to come our way. We are at the provincial conference of the ANC and we're focused to its business. And our eyes are on the process so that we achieve both the political objectives of this conference and we are sensitive to the other external issues as I spoke about.
The justice system is there all the time. It's not a feature of the conference. If there are court cases, we'll deal with the court cases. We're dealing with them. By the way, I can also tell you that we're winning almost all of them. That's why when there was a judgment on the KZN1, we're appealing it because we are convinced that it misinterpreted the constitution of the ANC. Otherwise, we're doing well with the court cases. We'll deal with those as they come, challenge them, confront them, win them. If we lose it, and assess what comes out of that. But we're dealing with them. But we can't plan the national conference on the basis of court cases. We're planning a national conference. We're working for it. It must be a success. Anything else that detracts us from succeeding, we'll deal with it.
Papineau, the Secretary General is relatively calm about all of the court action that we're seeing. But, I mean, some of these reports that we get, we hear of supposed money, we hear that on the first night, possibly people will be wining and dining and there could be money there. I mean, this should be a concern for a revolutionary movement as the ANC, that there are such reports where people even say money exchanges hands on that day.
Well, is the ANC a revolutionary movement? I think that's one thing that we must actually look at. Look, you know, some of the biggest challenges or the disagreements, it's mainly on patronage. I mean, if you look at the provinces themselves and the disputes, these were people towards Mangaung who were in agreement, but obviously people do change their mind. But it's mainly about patronage, because why would branch members, provincial members, fight to such a bitter end about national candidates? Why are they not fighting about policies and now at the moment fighting about, you know, which candidate to go after? Surely there will be money exchanged, because all of these people, they want to ensure that they align themselves with whichever candidate is going to win at the conference, and the likelihood is that, you know, the person in a couple of years would then become the state president. So how genuine are, you know, are all these comrades? And, you know, the other thing is the question of who's paying for all this litigation.
Unfortunately, I have to interject there. We have to just take your closing remarks. Professor Duvenage, your take here. Who stands to benefit? Where we're seeing ANC members fight to the bitter end. Are they disingenuous, at least some of them?
I think if you look at the internal processes and you look at the candidates, I believe that the CR17 group is probably the stronger one. But if you look at external influences, and here I'm talking about the influences of the state or the bigger regime, also the question of bribery, etc., then I believe it will go to the advantage of the ND17 group. I have no doubt that the political regime has vested interest in the continuation of Jacob Zuma and then in that sense the ND17, the NDZ group.
But then wouldn't you say, some are reporting that it's going both ways? They're accusing both sides of saying that money is exchanging hands in both camps. But nevertheless, we have run out of time. Thank you very much, panel, for joining us. And that's where we leave it until next time.